Hello, BookTube. These are the books I picked up in August. So the first book I picked up in August is Culture in the Third Reich by Moritz Follmer, and translated by Jeremy Noakes and Leslie Sharp. Dream and reality did indeed intermingle in the culture of the Third Reich. Racialist fantasies and spectacular propaganda set pieces contributing to this atmosphere alongside more benign cultural offerings such as performances of classical music or popular film comedies. A cultural palette that catered to the tastes of the majority helped encourage acceptance of the regime. The Third Reich was therefore eager to associate itself with comfortable middle-brow conventionality, while at the same time exploiting the latest trends that modern mass culture had to offer. It was precisely because the culture of the Nazi period accommodated such a range of different needs and aspirations that it was so successful in legitimizing war, imperial domination, and destruction. Moritz Follmer turns the spotlight on this fundamental aspect of the Third Reich's successful cultural appeal in his groundbreaking new study, investigating what culture meant for people in the years between 1933 and 1945, for convinced National Socialists at one end of the spectrum, via the legions of the apparently unpolitical, right through to anti-fascist activists, Jews, and other victims of their regime. Relating the everyday experience of people living under Nazism, he is able to give us a privileged insight into the question of why so many Germans enthusiastically embraced the regime and identified so closely with it. So, I saw this being hauled on Steve Donahue's channel a few months ago and added it to my wish list, and then I pre-ordered it from Amazon, which turned into a whole story. Basically, Amazon, when you pre-order, and I think maybe sometimes, I haven't actually bought a book individually from them in a while, but at least when you do the pre-orders, sometimes they'll use the postal service, the USPS, and then they'll use UPS. And currently they're using UPS. And so when the book was shipped, it basically left Amazon's Dallas distribution center and into UPS, and then it went from Dallas to San Antonio, and then it ended up getting lost at UPS's San Antonio facility for the better part of a week before I guess they found it, or it somehow got back into the system, and it eventually got to me. So anyway, it was kind of annoying, but quite happy to have this, and am looking forward to getting to it. Hopefully in November. I am meaning to read some German literature, but so far I haven't had much time to actually get around to reading any German lit. Anyway, so the second book I picked up this month is Streams of Gold, Rivers of Blood, The Rise and Fall of Byzantium, 955 AD to the First Crusade by Anthony Kaldellis. And there is nothing on the book except for a blurb. So it's a history of the Byzantines from 955 to the First Crusade. Looking forward to it. I picked this book up from Powell's City of Books. So earlier this month and late in July, there was the whole federal invasion of Portland, where for months protesters in Portland have consistently protested police brutality to African Americans and the unusually unwarranted shooting by police of African Americans. And the protests in Portland seem to be peaceful, but Trump wanted to make an example of them or something, so he sent in federal agents or mercenaries cosplaying as federal agents. Yeah, not entirely sure. And then they basically ratcheted up the violence and disappeared people for a few hours before releasing them without charge or something. Anyway, so I first heard of this on Twitter. I think Rick Wilson and I think even Steve Donahue had mentioned in their Twitter feeds. And so I went to the Oregon Public Broadcasting to try to get more information. And while I was reading the article there, I saw an interview with Emily Powell, the CEO of Powell's City of Books, the grand old independent bookstore in Portland. And she talked about how Powell's was struggling in the pandemic, that while they did see a burst of orders and increased business when they reopened for online orders, that has subsequently slowed to what typical online ordering. And so since there's no in-store at the time, no in-store customers, they weren't open for in-store visitation or shopping, they were struggling. And so I decided I want to help. I love Powell's. I love Portland. I was there about 14 years ago and fell in love with the city and fell in love with Powell's. That place is amazing. And so I decided I wanted to help and bought Streams of Gold and Rivers of Blood from them. I'm quite happy and looking forward to getting around to it. Powell's has since reopened, or at least some of the rooms at the big Burnside store are reopened. And of course, they're still open for online orders. Also, Book People in Austin have they've reopened for in-store shopping. Just maintain social distancing and wearing a mask and all of that. Anyway, so I also had an Libris order, just 3 books. All of these were $1.45. I'm quite happy about that. Although the shipping and the handling was a bit onerous, but that's usually because it's like a $1.45 book and the shipping and handling is about $3.99. So, but anyway, still. So the first book is Life in a Medieval City by Joseph and Francis Gies. Life in a medieval city evokes every aspect of city life in the Middle Ages by depicting in detail what it was like to live in a prosperous city of northwest Europe in the 12th and 13th centuries. The time is AD 1250, and the city is Troyes, capital of the County of Champagne, and site of 2 of the cycle of Champagne fairs, the hot fair in August and the cold fair in December. European civilization has emerged from the Dark Ages and is in the midst of a commercial revolution. Merchants and moneymen from all over Europe gather at Troyes to buy, sell, borrow, and lend, creating a bustling market center typical in the feudal era. So, sounds interesting. I saw this on Justin of Triumphal Reads' channel. He did a series of recommendation videos for the history reading challenge, where he would take a specific period and then he'd recommend books. And this was one of the ones he recommended for the medieval period. There's also Life in a Medieval Village that I think he recommended that I'm really interested in, and one on castles too. So really looking forward to this, particularly because one of my many ideas for a fantasy is one inspired by the medieval period, and I wanted to really get a handle on what life was really like, and so this will definitely be helpful on that. Next up, I picked up a biography of Richard III by Charles Ross. I think this is part of the English Monarch series, but I could be wrong. I think Steve Donahue had a copy of this book in his library tour that got me interested. And I'm really interested in picking up a lot more of these English Monarch series. Unfortunately, the back is all blurbs, so I can't really tell you what it is, but obviously it's a biography of Richard III. So. Next up, in the final book I picked up from Alibris is a reacquisition, The Peloponnesian War by Donald Kagan. For almost 3 decades at the end of the 5th century BC, the ancient world was torn apart by a conflict that was, within its historical context, as dramatic, divisive, and destructive as the great world wars of the 20th century. The Peloponnesian War pitted Greek against Greek. The Athenians, with their glorious empire, rich legacy of democracy and political rights, and extraordinary cultural achievement, against the militaristic, oligarchic Spartan state. The result was a period of unprecedented brutality, one that violated even the rugged code that had previously governed Greek combat, and led to an enormous destruction of life and property, intensification of factional and class hostility, and a reversal of the trend toward democratic development. With these came a collapse in the habits, institutions, beliefs, and restraints that had long been the foundation of civilization. By far the most important source of our knowledge of the conflict is the history written by his contemporary and participant, Thucydides. And while his work is justly admired as a masterpiece of historical writing, it is ultimately not completely satisfactory as a history of the conflict and all that it can teach us. Its most obvious shortcoming is that it is incomplete, stopping 7 years before the war's end. It also obviously cannot include the revelatory discoveries of recent scholarship. To meet the needs of modern readers, Donald Kagan, one of the world's most respected classical, political, and military historians, has written a new account of the Peloponnesian War, a lively, readable narrative that offers a richly detailed portrait of a vanished world while honoring its timeless relevance. In chronicling the rise and fall of a great empire, the Peloponnesian War illuminates the interplay of intelligence and chance in human affairs, the role of great individuals and masses of people in determining the course of events, and the potential of leadership and the limits within which it must operate. Among the brilliant portraits of extraordinary statesmen are those of Pericles, the greatest among the Athenians, and a man determined to pursue a policy of deterrence, and the charismatic, duplicitous Alcibiades. Kagan captures the dynamic of war in his thrilling recreations of some of the most famous military campaigns of antiquity, from the misguided Athenian offensive in Sicily to the stunning Spartan victory at Aegospotami. With its fresh examination of a pivotal moment of Western civilization, the Peloponnesian War is a magisterial work of historiography, a chronicle of a dark time whose lessons are especially resonant today. So I had this book. Initially, I was a member, or I guess a patron of the History Book Club. It was one of those book clubs where you could buy a number of books for not a whole lot of money, about like $5 to $10, and you'd get like 5 books, 4 or 5 books, and then every month or so they would send you a new catalog and like a book of the month, where if you had to either say you didn't want the book or they'd send it to you. But you had to buy a certain number of those books to maintain your membership. And so I picked this up when I first joined, and I got onto wanting this book because the Peloponnesian War, this book was a text for one of my first history classes. We didn't actually have to read the whole of this, we only read selections, but it was an intro to liberal arts war, and it was quite interesting. The first unit was on the Peloponnesian War and the Iliad, and it was very fascinating. So the final book I picked up this month is Maoism, A Global History by Julia Lovell. In this new history, Julia Lovell reevaluates Maoism as both a Chinese and an international force, linking its evolution in China with its global legacy. It is a story that takes us from the tea plantations of North India to the Sierras of the Andes, from Paris's fifth arrondissement to the fields of Tanzania, from the rice paddies of Cambodia to the terraces of Brixton. For decades, the West has dismissed Maoism as an outdated historical and political phenomenon. Since the 1980s, China seems to have abandoned the utopian turmoil of Mao's revolution in favor of authoritarian capitalism, but Mao and his ideas remain central to the People's Republic and the legitimacy of its communist government. With disagreements and conflicts between China and the West on the rise, the need to understand the political legacy of Mao is urgent and growing. Starting with the birth of Mao's revolution in northwest China in the 1930s, and concluding with its violent afterlives in South Asia and resurgence in the People's Republic today, this is a landmark history of global Maoism. It sounds very fascinating. I think I first encountered this book on Steve Donahue's Year's Best List. It was one of the 10 best histories from 2019. And I added it in my Amazon wish list. And then I kind of thought nothing of it. I've got a trillion books in either wish list. And then I read Underland by Robert McFarlane, and I was doing a little bit of research on him because I really loved Underland, and so I was looking him up on Wikipedia, and I discovered that Julia Lovell was his wife, and that they both are award-winning writers. So that got me looking more into her work. And so there's several of her books I've since added to various wish lists. And I went ahead and saw that this book was getting a paperback release scheduled for August. So I'm like, I'll just pre-order the paperback. So I did, and quite happy I have it. Was delivered by UPS, much like Culture in the Third Reich. But this time it did not take a week-long trip to San Antonio. Oh, yeah. So next month, I have 2 pre-orders. I'm probably going to pick up another book from Pals. There's a 20% off sale that I'm going to jump on. And I also have an Libris order coming in. So I don't know if I'm going to order anything else. I know I want to pick up some Victorian lit. I have not much in the way of Victorian literature, and I would like to do a bit more with Victober this coming year than I did last year. So these are the books of August. And hopefully that was long enough for the thumbnail to pick that up. Because I would like to do the pyramid for the thumbnail. Anyway, BookTube, I will see you in a few hours with weekly reads. And until then, have a great afternoon and please stay safe.